Have you ever heard a laugh so infectious it made you smile with pure joy? That was my niece. She also took a particular delight in the evil characters from fairy tales, and she would have stayed on a carousel all night if she could. Unfortunately, getting her on a carousel or just out of the house got harder as time went on. You see, she couldn't hold herself upright. She couldn't walk or talk. Well, actually, she had two words: I go. Because even though her body wouldn't let her do things, her spirit was unstoppable. Until the day it did stop, forever. My sister called me on my way to work that morning. They'd been in the hospital all night and things were not good. By the time I made it to the lobby of the hospital, I was shaking. On the edge of panic, I asked the receptionist for the room number. And after giving it to me, she said, "Calm down, honey. It'll be okay." By the time I reached my niece's room, I was out of breath. I pushed open the door and my sister stood up. Putting her hands out, she said, "Stop. Don't come in here if you can't handle this." I looked at the bed, and there was my niece's body. I ran in and hugged my sister tight, and I sobbed with her. Yet in that moment, all I could feel was this consuming rage. How dare the receptionist tell me, "Calm down, honey. It'll be okay." It was not okay. And honestly, I wanted to run back downstairs and scream at her until she was crying too. Looking back, I realized that that was a crystallizing moment in my life. I can admit now that her words had a direct impact on how I processed the pain of that moment. The added feeling of helpless indignation complicated things. Instead of focusing on the grief and profound loss I was experiencing, I was irrationally focused on her words. Given the circumstances, they felt dismissive, even patronizing to me. And I know now that that wasn't her intention, but it was an unintended result. There's a power in how we communicate with others. It has a direct impact on how receptive they are to us and how we influence them directly or indirectly. And one of the ways that we do that in the most intimate way possible is in the parent and child connection. The way we communicate with our children is vitally important, but more often than not, we just throw words away. And we think it's okay, it's fine, as long as they're learning everything they need to learn and we're telling them what to do, that's fine. But the truth is they pick up so much more on how we say the things we say and in the intention behind them. As I've moved through my life, I've experienced excessive loss. Through the excessive loss, I was also in the fields and studies of early childhood development, psychology of human development, coaching, and so much more. Along those lines, I learned a lot of things. I learned a wealth of knowledge in the fact of the way that we communicate with our children and the way that we're supported from other people to help us better communicate with our children makes a huge difference. Because the truth is that though biology may give us the ability to bring new life into this world, there is no society on this world that requires people to learn how to be a healthy parent before they become one. And more specifically, I've learned that it takes active learning and a desire to learn how to be the best parent we can be. Not a perfect parent. There's no such thing as a perfect parent. We all make mistakes. That's vital to remember. But we can learn how to better communicate with our children, and we can learn how to support them. And it requires so many more people than you would actually think. It's not just the parent and the child. Because as the parent and the child, you're too close to the circumstances sometimes to actually see what kind of strategies you need to gain a little bit of perspective so that you can engage your child in a healthy manner. I've learned specifically that very particular communication skills can improve our ability to enhance our interactions with our children and other people all around us, and they can help us communicate on deeper levels. These skills can amplify the wisdom and the messages and the lessons that we have to share with our children, and in truth, with anyone, anywhere, from world stages to intimate conversations. And today, I'd actually love to share some of these nuggets of knowledge with you about communication and how we can change that communication. So first, let's talk about the power of what I like to call the empathetic language specification. I'll break down what that means. Empathy is our capacity to perceive and resonate with others' emotions, which allows us to feel and understand their pain and suffering, or even their enthusiasm and joy. What's so important is that empathy is a key and core component in the parenting world, but it's also an example of the way that we can interact with other people. And that's truly what it is when it comes to parenting. You're interacting with a little human that you have a lot of responsibility for, who eventually becomes a big human, right? However, one of the things I want to point out is that the how we communicate our empathy to others is just as important as the feeling of empathy itself. You know, if that receptionist had changed just one word, it would have changed the entire tone of what she said and how it landed with me. Had she said, "I hope it will be okay," her hope for a good outcome would have been supportive and compassionate. It might have meant the difference between a moment of true empathetic connection versus the unintended anger I carried into that excruciating experience. When I run infertility support groups and parenting groups, I work with people who've experienced a loss or trauma, or even the ins and outs of those parenting struggles, especially those ins and outs of the parenting struggles. And ensuring that I make an empathetic connection with purposeful word choices safeguards the non-judgmental, inclusive environment that my clients need to feel supported and seen. The second piece of wisdom I'd like to share with you is the power of non-verbal cues. In the field of early childhood, we talk about the area of receptive and expressive communication skills. Receptive communication skills, or what we take in about how people are connecting with and around us, comes before most expressive skills. Babies and toddlers are constantly taking in eye contact, facial expressions, the sounds of different voices, and so much more, with all of their senses as they expand their environmental awareness. Then a baby will first make what we call nonverbal sounds and gestures and expressions, body movements, all of those things to communicate: crying, flailing limbs, pointing, grabbing, touching, and so on. Many a parent will tell you their child has particular cries for when they're tired, hungry, hurt, or even scared. Interestingly, when we develop language skills, we don't outgrow the resource and power that nonverbal communication provides, but we can become less overtly conscious of them until something signals our awareness that maybe we should pay attention. Say you're in a meeting at work and someone keeps touching their nose. You might think, "Oh, I wonder if they have a cold. Maybe they're trying to tell me I have something on my nose." Or if you don't know them, if you know them well, this might be their nervous tick telling you that they're stressed or frustrated. Because nonverbal communication is part of our early developmental skills, there's something instinctive that speaks to us when we read those cues. And, if you know someone really well, you may learn to ignore certain frequently appearing cues because you already know what it is that they're doing when they're doing that, like a deep sigh or something like that. When I speak with an audience, whether it's 10 people or 7,000, I maintain an awareness of what my facial expression, my eye contact, my body language, and my vocal fillers like ums and ahs are communicating to my audience. I don't always get them perfect, but I am aware of them and practice with them daily. Now, the third takeaway I'd like to share with you today is the power of the emotional contagion through storytelling. The fascinating phenomenon of emotional contagion happens when one person's emotions and behaviors directly trigger similar emotions in others. What's even more amazing, they're also a very powerful form of social influence. Because while we can be affected by the emotions of those around us, they can be affected by ours too. Have you ever listened to someone telling a story about their pet and they're just lighting up with the joy and the funny thing their dog did? And you find yourself smiling and feeling maybe even a little lighter. That's the emotional contagion. So when we apply this through storytelling and speaking, we aren't just sharing information, we're sharing the emotions and the intentions of the stories that make up our lives and the lessons we've learned along the way. So let's do a quick recap of the 3 communication skills. Empathetic language specification. How we communicate our empathy in the words we use allows us to make deeper connections when we're conveying our messages to others. Nonverbal cues. Instincts from our early communication skills allow us to interpret vocal sounds, gestures, facial expressions, body language, and more when we read those cues. And lastly, the emotional contagion through storytelling. When we share the emotions within the stories, we increase our ability to share the lessons and the messages and the knowledge we've learned because the feelings will resonate and influence others better than information alone ever can. So before I end, I'd like to ask you to consider doing the following. Think about a personal story you love to share with others. While you do that, think about the words you're using, the nonverbal cues you're providing, and the emotional intention behind the story. Write that story down with these parameters in mind and record yourself telling the story. Telling the story, not writing out the entire story and using it as a script, but rather retelling it, reliving it. Then watch it back. And with all of those things in mind, how does the story sound now? Remember one thing. It doesn't have to be an epic story to be real and connect with others. And I'll bet anything that that is a story worth sharing.